Katie stood frozen, gripping the HOA letter, anger and disbelief flooding her. Her home, her sanctuary, was being torn apart by faceless rules. But what happened next would shock everyone, even those who'd seen it all. Let's start from the beginning. It was a blistering summer afternoon when Katie Anderson, a single mother of two, first opened the letter from her homeowners association, HOA. The heat from the sun seemed to radiate off the paper as she sat at her kitchen table, her coffee cooling beside her. With a sinking feeling, she read the words that followed. The HOA was demanding that she remove the backyard pool she'd installed years ago, the one that had given her children a safe place to swim, play, and cool off during the scorching summers. The letter didn't offer any real explanation, just a vague reference to some clause in the community guidelines that Katie had never seen or heard of before. The pool, something so central to her children's summer memories, was now suddenly a problem, a violation. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone to call the HOA office. She needed answers. But when the representative on the other end picked up, all she was met with was an impersonal, rehearsed voice. There was no empathy, no room for negotiation. The response was mechanical, cold. Remove the pool or we will take further action. Katie felt the walls closing in. Her stomach churned, and for a brief moment, she considered packing up and leaving. But this was her home. This was where she had built a life, not just for herself, but for her kids. A place she fought so hard to create and protect. And now, it felt as though someone was trying to strip it all away without so much as a second thought. The frustration bubbled up inside her. She knew she couldn't let this go. But she also knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. Katie's initial shock quickly transformed into something far more dangerous: anger. This pool wasn't just a luxury, it was the heartbeat of her family's life. For years, it had been a safe space for her kids to play, exercise, and cool off during the brutal summer heat. It was more than just water and tiles. It was their escape, their joy, their sanctuary. And during the pandemic, it became even more crucial. With the world locked down, it was the one place her children could feel free, where they could forget about the isolation and fear that dominated every other part of their lives. The more Katie thought about it, the more her anger deepened. How could the HOA, a faceless authority that seemed so indifferent to her situation, come after something that meant so much to her family? She felt a fierce, protective rage rising within her. She wasn't just going to roll over and give up. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Katie began digging into the community guidelines, trying to understand why her pool had suddenly become a problem. As she combed through the rules, something didn't sit right. She discovered that several of her neighbors had similar pools, some even larger and more extravagant, but none of them had received such a letter. It didn't take long for Katie to realize that the HOA wasn't acting in the interest of fairness or community. No, they were targeting her. And as she thought about it, the reason became all too clear. Katie was a single mother. No husband, no support network except for her children. They were going after her, and it felt personal. The more she uncovered, the more the inconsistencies and selective enforcement stood out. Why weren't her neighbors being penalized? Why was her family singled out? Katie couldn't shake the bitter realization that the HOA was far more concerned with aesthetics and rules than the well-being of its residents. The hypocrisy was maddening, and with each new revelation, her hatred for the HOA grew. This wasn't just about a pool, it was about power, control, and her family's right to live their lives in peace. Katie wasn't one to back down, not when it came to protecting her children and their home. The HOA might have held power over the community, but they would not bully her into submission. She wasn't going to let them tear apart the one thing that brought her family peace, not without a fight. Determined to find a way out, Katie dove headfirst into the legal labyrinth. For weeks, she scoured legal documents, HOA bylaws, and any case she could find related to homeowners and pools. It was tedious, exhausting work, but she wasn't willing to give up. Every day after putting the kids to bed, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, her computer screen filled with legal jargon, searching for a loophole, something, anything, that could help her. Her eyes ached from the endless hours of reading, but then, one evening, as she scrolled through obscure legal forums, she stumbled upon something. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of the internet was a ruling from a neighboring state, a case nearly identical to hers. The ruling made it clear: homeowners had the right to install pools, provided they met certain safety and environmental standards. Even if the HOA had guidelines to the contrary, this legal precedent protected her right to keep her pool. Katie's heart raced as she reread the passage several times, making sure she wasn't misinterpreting it. This could be the key. It was a spark of hope, a small light in the suffocating darkness of her frustration. She quickly gathered her notes and reached out to a lawyer, asking if this precedent could be used in her case against the HOA. The lawyer's response came quickly, and when they confirmed that the ruling could indeed be applied to her situation, Katie felt a surge of relief. This was the breakthrough she needed. But as she prepared to fight back, she knew the battle was far from over. The HOA wasn't going to give up easily, and now it was personal. But she was ready. She had the law on her side, and she wasn't going to back down without a fight. Armed with the legal precedent, Katie took a deep breath and marched into court. The fight that followed was long and grueling. Every hearing, every legal document, every back and forth felt like an uphill battle. But Katie's determination never wavered. She was no stranger to adversity, and this was just another challenge to overcome. Her children needed this pool, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from them. The courtroom felt cold, the stakes high. The HOA's lawyers, with their polished suits and rehearsed arguments, were relentless. But Katie's resolve was stronger. She was fighting for more than just a backyard. She was fighting for the rights of every homeowner who might be subjected to the same unjust treatment. As the days stretched into weeks, her patience and persistence never faltered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge's ruling came down. The moment was electric with tension. The court's voice echoed, and the words were clear. Katie had won. The HOA not only had to allow her to keep the pool, but they were also ordered to pay for the restoration of her backyard, which had been damaged by their initial threats and invasive inspections. Katie felt a rush of relief. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months lifted, replaced by a wave of satisfaction. Standing in her backyard, watching her children splash in the pool, she could hardly believe it. They were safe. The pool was safe. Her family's safe haven had been preserved, and the HOA had been forced to pay for the damage they had caused. But the victory didn't stop there. The judge had also ruled that the HOA needed to revise its outdated, overbearing rules. Katie's fight had not only protected her home, but it had also paved the way for a fairer, more reasonable approach to community living. As Katie watched her children play, she knew this victory was more than just personal. She had stood up for herself, for her family, and for every homeowner who might have been unfairly targeted in the future. Justice had been served.